tuning in, which is really exciting. And we have a really great panel of guests who are going to sort of share their thoughts on the environment tonight and what we can do to help protect biodiversity. Our panelists are going to begin by introducing themselves, and just talking about their personal, professional relationships to biodiversity and the environment. And a special note that Philippe Saint-Onge from Parks Canada sends his regrets. He's not able to make it tonight as he had a family emergency. So we only have 4 panelists, but that's okay because that'll leave us a little more time for questions at the end. So I'm going to call on Ron Tremblay first, who's actually on the phone, having some internet issues. So Ron, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your relationship with biodiversity.
Okay, Lewin Vanessa, Widam Skidinawado, Kolaziko pa yod Wolastoqey yod NB, Eluita Wolastoqey, Wolastoqewi Nation, Wolastoqey Kci-Sakom Nelchu Wolastoqewi, Kaka Goswagodum, Nagamalsam Wagodum. But we Wolastoqey Mag again is also what the difficulty did Chibano, National Spiasno, Galata Guesnog. Naga Negwisit Skiktamig, Naga Mitax with Musigis, Naga Mosum Sweet Westpadouset, Naga Nokmas we Nibouset. Niglage. First and foremost, I wanted to speak my language. Unfortunately, we don't have a third interpreter here for to interpret what I just said, but I welcomed you, who the people who are sitting within Wolastoqey, our non-ceded homeland, and we are the Wolastoqewi. We are the people of this beautiful and bountiful river that flows right through Fredericton here, and all the way. It starts up through Maine and through parts of Quebec, and all the way down to the Bay of Fundy. That's our territory on both sides of that river, and our people have been here since the beginning of time, when our creation story was told, how we were created by by the great mysteries of who we don't know the names of, and hence we saw how we titled them the Great Mysteries. And I said my traditional name was spasaqsit-possesom, which was given to me through ceremony, and which translates morning star burning. It's the very first light that comes up in the east each morning. And I represent, through my mom's side, the Crow clan, and through my father's side, the Wolf clan. And so I'm speaking today, representing both of those clans, and both my parents and both sets of my grandparents. So I'm fortunate to be a fluent speaker of my language, the Wolastoqey Ladwai-Wagan, we call it, Wolastoqey language. And so I'm taking this position of focusing on our language, because I've always said to many of my students and many of the people that I rub shoulders with, that the answers lie within our language, the original language of this territory. So when you use terms like biodiversity, unfortunately, we don't have words like that within our language, but we do have very distinctive and descriptive words for the forest, for each tree, for each plant, the flora and fauna, and so on. So I look at when I look outdoors and see the forest and the trees, I call that the Mausawagan, which means life or creation. So biodiversity is that. We need every speck of earth, and every drop of water and every breath of air to really sustain life. You know, all that helps us to live a well-balanced and wealthy and healthy lifestyle. So when I think of biodiversity, I think of all the levels, and from the center of Mother Earth to her surface and all that is around us, from the east, from the south, and from the west, and from the north, and all that's above us. So within our language, we call that, as I said, Passamoquoddy. That's life, and all that's above and below and around us is biodiversity, is what I see as life. So that's my quick description of biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ron. Okay, so next we're going to hear from Roberta.
Hi, everybody. Excuse me. Okay, so I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, New Brunswick chapter. And my connection to biodiversity is that it's my mission to conserve it. It's my career. It's my life. From the time I was a little kid, I've always felt a really deep connection to wildlife. And from that point, the conservation of wildlife and their habitat was my motivation. And everything that I did, everything that I studied, I wanted to do what I could to protect it. And when I finally left university and started entering into the work world, I was privileged to have a job, to find a job where I actually just needed to go out and talk to people and convince people that this is what we needed to do. So I became an advocate for nature, for wildlife, and our relationship to them. So for me, I'm connected to biodiversity. Biodiversity is connected to me. We need to fight. And my mantra has become that we're not going to allow the biodiversity crisis to get worse on my watch. I don't want that to happen. I want to do whatever I can to fight against it. And I feel privileged to have been able to have a career where I've been able to look eye to eye with a humpback whale and see the Restigouche salmon swimming underneath my canoe, and listen and watch a barred owl in a city park in Fredericton. And I want us to always be able to feel those kinds of connections, and for the next generations to be able to enjoy that too. So for me, that's my connection to biodiversity. I want to speak up on behalf of the voiceless, and speak truth to power about what we need to do to protect it. So thanks, and looking forward to the questions and question sessions later too.
Awesome, thank you so much, Roberta. Next, we have Lisa. Vous pouvez parler en français? I think you're muted.
All right, so bonjour tout le monde.
Good evening, everyone. I will try to share my screen because I prepared something. So there. I'm Lisa Fauteux. I present myself as Native. My mother is Acadian. My father was Quebecer. I work as director of Verts Rivages organization. We're a young one. We've been in existence for 4 years. We were in Chipagan, Lamek, and Misco. The photograph that I have on the screen is one of the first things that are organized, and I want to show it because it's a determinant aspect of my career. I invited Abercrombie from the Papineau Fall to come for the official opening of the Echo Festival. That was a festival that we wanted to celebrate it on the biodiversity. And one of the things he taught me, and that really is deep with biodiversity for me, no matter the state of the world, what we need the most, that's me saying it, but it's to be gentle, to be nice and kindness. And I find that kindness represents well what nature is for me. And the more I think about it, the more I disconnect from that nature by being human and nature together. Well, nature answer all I need, and there's a middle guy that came in the middle to answer in part, to remove us from autonomy and to answer our needs with easiness. That's something that comes to my mind. The more we take ourselves our autonomy, we take it in relationship with nature, the more we'll be able to improve somewhat our personal state. And that is the relation between me and nature. It's very important for us and for her. And in my work, what I do, I present the diversity crisis as a sign that the planetary boundaries. And as for the biodiversity, we also work on the problematic, on the meeting of the oceans. We say what is happening in the ocean, because it's also one of the elements to look at very well at what is happening. But as for biodiversity, we have a series of small projects that are in relationship with the birds. And this is a group that is touched by all the changes that occur right now. And we are close to 40% of the shore birds. And that's one of the idea that I wanted to leave with you, that I learn with our work. It's quite often being a scientist or activist, we have the impression that by giving facts, by talking about a problem, we will inspire the people to change this, because when there's a problem, we have to react in our mind. But for the population in general, it can be discouraging, if you wish. We don't attract the people. Well, we attract them with honey, but we have to try, even for us, personally, I've often had anxiety attacks, quite severe, towards the state of things. And that's started when I was a very young kid. When I was 6 years old, I would listen to the nature of things, and I was overwhelmed. I couldn't believe it. So we have to take care of ourselves. That negative aspect, these difficult emotions must not take over us, must not discourage us. And what is good is to connect ourselves to everything we appreciate with nature, and remember often to resource ourselves and to keep connected, and our connection as alive as possible, and to concentrate on the fact that these are lessons that Gilbert Soul taught me. Nature can be strange or surprising. Nature has powers that we forget sometimes. Well, anyway, there's hidden hope. And one of our main projects is that we work to protect the collier. Collier is a bird that stopped in the Acadian Peninsula during its migratory and visited the peat mouse. But with the blueberry harvesting, he started using a lot the blueberry houses to feed, and that caused a friction with the blueberry producers. So we've had projects to try and improve the cohabitation with the producers of blueberry, and it doesn't go to see how this bird, we felt sorry how it was extraordinary and the surprising things he would do. He gave us information on migration, and with the knowledge and conscientious of what that bird was out, we saw a greater interest among the producers. It's not only a bird, but it's something special, and it gave them a better preparation to protect it. So the tolerance by working with the producers and by making them sensitive, it went from 30 to 80%. Those that really like this bird, it gave us the meaning of how to approach some allies, non-traditional allies to the wildlife, how to rally them to our cause. And that idea also of cohabitation, it's important to keep for biodiversity. Often we split a human from nature, but if we could have more and more place to nature in our life, how much road could we do to protect diversity? So we have a project in Misco that is forthcoming to protect even more. But I just wanted to say that by wanting to talk about the conservation of trees in New Brunswick, I look at the mandate of the Department of Agriculture, Aquafood, and Fisheries, and when you look at the mandates of departments, there can be a lot of input to protect biodiversity. If you look at the mandate of the department, the first line of the mandate, the first sentence, if I can find it, is develop and implement the approach of total exploitation for the factors by the sectors. That gave me coldness in the back, and also sustainable development. But it should be the other way around. If the departments could each see how they can contribute to a conservation of biodiversity, I think that we could see some changes becoming reality quickly at a higher scale, because as Roberta was saying just now, it's a collective project. We must all stand up to improve and defend as much as we can. And one of the things that make a big difference, I believe, is to take a natural mitigation of the people. They are too separated from nature. The more activities we have with them to give them a better knowledge, the more it will help. And even as adults, as parents, or in society, to have a lifestyle that are coherent, and we must start with ourselves. That's what will make more changes. So that's about, I will go faster. And we'll have a chance to talk about solution. Well, I just want to take time to say thank you to all of you that are interested in the cause, and to underline that if it's because we are sustained by all the organization in the community in the peninsula. That's why we're accomplishing so much, those who work with us, and that's interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. Well, I work as curator of zoology, and I'm head of the Department of Natural History at the Brunswick Museum. And my research over the years has included organisms as varied as worms to whales. But essentially, I've spent the past 40 plus years investigating the biodiversity of Atlantic Canada. So what I'd like to do in the short time that I have this evening is to summarize what we know about biodiversity in New Brunswick, but I think more importantly, what we don't know and some of the challenges that we face. So estimates on the number of species alive in the world today range from 5.3 million to 1 trillion. The lower figure includes those species that we can see with the naked eye and those that most of us are familiar with: green plants, mushrooms, worms to whales. The higher figure includes these plus microorganisms such as bacteria and some fungi. The best current guess is that there are about 8.7 million species exclusive of microorganisms in the world today. So in New Brunswick, we estimate there are 30 to 40,000 of these species, and that's somewhat less than half the total number of species believed to occur in Canada. Given New Brunswick's relative size, I think that's actually suggests New Brunswick a pretty diverse place. However, the way species are distributed across the various groups of organisms is very uneven. Ironically, the best known groups, the vertebrates, the fish, the amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals make up a mere 2% of that New Brunswick total. The vascular plants about 4%. Arthropods, mites, spiders, especially insects, make up a whopping 72% of that 30 to 40,000 species. In New Brunswick, the Hymenoptera, the bees, the ants, the wasps, are actually the most diverse group, although globally there are more species of beetles. Until the last several decades, nearly all of our attention in terms of protecting biodiversity has been focused on vertebrates and vascular plants, especially among those groups that we as humans exploit most heavily: the fish, the birds, and the mammals. More recently, governments have started to turn attention to groups that are poorly known, but critical to the way ecosystems function. This includes invertebrates such as pollinators and fungi that are so important in the way forests function. But we have a long way to go. We focused a lot of our attention and conservation resources on protecting a small minority of our best known species and the most visible contributors to the biodiversity of the region. Not surprisingly, we've generally ignored the most poorly known of our species groups, but these also happen to be the most diverse. Clearly, lack of information is a huge impediment. Fungi make up an estimated 12% of New Brunswick biodiversity. Although truth be told, the basic work of determining what species of fungi are present in New Brunswick is still in its infancy. Likewise, we know little about highly diverse groups such as mites and soil inhabiting nematodes. Even a group as conspicuous and ecologically important as ants was largely unknown in New Brunswick until last year, when a graduate student, Erin Fairweather, working out of the museum, published a study on ant diversity in Rockwood Park in St. John. There are an estimated 85 to 96 species of ants in New Brunswick. When it comes to ants, we've just scratched the surface. I expect much of the discussion this evening will be concerned with native biodiversity. Nonetheless, a significant and growing component of our biodiversity is composed of non-native species. About 1/3 of the vascular flora, the trees, the shrubs, grasses, wildflowers in New Brunswick, are non-native. Most of these are of European origin. Many of our terrestrial soil inhabiting vertebrates are likewise introduced, including many terrestrial mollusks, all 18 of our earthworms but 2, all of our 10 to 12 species of woodlice, and most of our millipedes. Many of these species now play important roles in the often highly disturbed habitats that we as humans have created: roadsides, clear cuts, old fields, and clear ground generally. Nearly all of the vascular plants that we see along the roadsides and on vacant ground are non-native and important in preventing soil erosion. However, a small minority of introduced species have outsized and devastating impacts on native biodiversity. The emerald ash borer, a beetle of Asian origin, will likely be responsible for the virtual elimination of the ash tree from New Brunswick forests in the decades ahead. Non-native earthworms have the potential to dramatically reduce forest biodiversity as woodlands shift from mixed and softwood dominated to hardwood tree species in response to climate change. The fungus that causes white nose in bats is native to Eurasia, has reduced our overwintering bat population by more than 99% since its introduction to New Brunswick in 2011. So species distributions and abundance, as both native and non-native, are in a constant state of flux, now even more so with climate change. Controlling the inevitable introduction of non-native species while protecting native biodiversity, all while species ranges shift dramatically due to climate change, will be a significant challenge. Compounding that challenge is dwindling expertise in those branches of the biodiversity sciences concerned with the description, evolutionary relationships, and biogeography of species generally. expertise in regional floras and faunas has always been in short supply. And of course, all of this is happening just at the time when we need to be monitoring and documenting changes in biodiversity most urgently. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion tonight and to your questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Don. One of the things I'll sort of hopefully get out of this tonight is that, you know, the panelists are all coming from very different points of view, but all working towards that same goal. So, you know, whether it's academic or, you know, small NGO or larger established NGO, it'll be interesting to sort of see how we sort of see these issues together. So we have two main questions that we're going to run through, and then have some time for audience questions, and then there'll be sort of a last question to kind of conclude the evening. So Roberta, I'm going to start with you for this first question. I'm going to say it in English and then I will say it in French as well. So the first question is, within the context of your field and expertise, what is the single greatest threat to biodiversity, the environment, in New Brunswick? Dans le contexte de votre domaine expertise, quelle est la plus grande menace pour la biodiversité, l'environnement au Nouveau-Brunswick?
Okay.
Big question.
Yeah. So the biggest threat that, in my opinion, is habitat destruction. And it comes in many forms and happens in many different ways. But attendant to that big threat, I think the biggest threat to biodiversity conservation in New Brunswick is the inaction of successive governments and our inability as a society and our apparent collective unwillingness to actually take the big steps that are needed to halt the threats that we have known for many, many decades are impacting biodiversity and creating species at risk and making the biodiversity crisis worse. And I think that's really the biggest threat from my perspective. It's we need to have an overriding goal as a society to protect nature and all of its protective variety that we depend upon so much. But governments have been very reluctant to make the big decisions, to make the hard decisions sometimes that need to be made to do that.
And just as a follow-up, why do you think there's so much reluctance to make those decisions?
I would say that the way that we have constructed our society and the way that we have constructed our economy, we are no longer, and maybe never did, living within the limits of nature. And the way we undertake our natural resource harvesting and collection and industrial use of those natural resources, which impacts all of biodiversity on land and sea, it is no longer reflective of the limits of nature or even understands how we might be going beyond the limits of nature, in what ways we're going beyond the limits of nature. And until we get a better grasp of that and have more understanding of what it looks like for us to live within the limits of nature and actually start doing that, I believe that it's going to be tough to convince the main decision makers in society that they need to make hard choices and stand up to those who feel that the conservation of biodiversity is a threat to their industry or their particular use of the land or sea.
So much. Dawn, we'll go to you. So what do you think is the single greatest threat to biodiversity or the environment here in New Brunswick?
Well, I couldn't agree with Roberta more. I think that worldwide loss of natural habitat is the single greatest threat to biodiversity, and New Brunswick is no different. In New Brunswick, I think forestry is probably the major source of habitat loss. But road construction, I think, also results in a lot of disturbed habitat. It provides corridors for non-native species to expand their range in the province. So yeah, it's habitat loss. I'll add another thing that I think maybe doesn't get as much attention, and I think that's lack of knowledge of what's out there in terms of provincial biodiversity. There's still a great deal that we don't know about some of our most diverse groups of organisms, as I mentioned earlier. And if we don't know what species New Brunswick supports, that leaves us unaware of the contributions of these species to the way provincial ecosystems function. And without that knowledge, the probability is that we'll just do a very poor job at protecting provincial biodiversity.
Okay, thank you so much, Don. Lisa, c'est à toi.
Entièrement d'accord avec tout ce qui a été dit avant. Si je veux ajouter une note.
If I can add a reflective note about my personal experience, I bring it back to the individual. In fact, I'm talking with a conservation officer with 33 years of experience here on the peninsula, Monsieur Claude Cavin. He told me once what it will take is for the people to stand up and defend nature. And what I think it takes or stop the people from standing up to defend nature is in part because of the disconnection, and disconnection is really related to the fact that we are deconcentrated in our lifestyle, in our mode of life. We don't have time to do anything anymore, and we don't take the time to be in link with nature and to cultivate our relationship with her. We have to work. We have a lot of things to do. If we were more connected, we would know better how to defend it.
Voyez-vous que
you see that it's changing somewhat? Yes. Oh, yes. I have much more demand as to what we can do. I'm involved with the Chamber of Commerce, and the Chamber of Commerce has started to ask questions. The idea is if everyone, if we find what we can do, the idea is it can't all come from the government, even if the government is super responsible, and we would like to see a better leadership sometimes. While waiting that it will happen, we can all be active there. I see improvement coming. Thank you. Ron.
Next, what do you think is the largest threat to biodiversity in New Brunswick?
Well, I want to just follow suit from how my grandfather used to respond to questions like that. I recall. I just want to share a story of my childhood. I might have been around 4 or 5 years old, and I'm the youngest of 10, so I wasn't yet in school. So I went down the road, what we called it, in Tobic. I'm originally from Tobic, Nagutkuk. And I went down the road to visit my grandparents with my mom. And as we approached the driveway, went down the driveway, the old gravel driveway, and out back was my grandfather. Around this time of year, he was getting his garden ready. He was tilling the earth by hand, and then so my mom went inside to visit my grandma, and then I stayed outside as usual with my grandfather. So he motioned to me to go with him, and so I grabbed his hand, and we went to the shoreline of the Tobic River, which we call Nagut. And his house was pretty much at the tip of the 2 rivers, the Nagut and the Wolastoqey, which is the Tobic and the St. John River, the settlers call. And I recall him telling me at the time when he was a young boy, and he said there was a time, he said, when the salmon used to come up and spawn in the late spring. He says you can actually hear the salmon coming up the river before you can see them. He says, and it was like the water was shaking, and then you can see them coming up, and then hear them. And he says there were so many salmon that you can actually walk on their backs. There was literally like thousands and thousands of salmon. He said, and I recall my mom and dad telling me to go down and get a salmon for their meal, for supper. And then he said, I wouldn't need a fish nor a net. I just used my hands. And back then, when the rivers were low then, and he could scoop up a salmon with his hands and take it up over the bank, and then they would have a feast with the salmon. And then he said, and across the river, he pointed. He says that's where I used to pick all my medicine. He said the gilhizawusk, which is calamus root and gold thread and the various different medicines. And he said, and that's where a lot of the nuts grow and the berries. He says, and then they made those dams, he called them. And he said, and they flooded the area where he used to pick all his medicines and where the food, the wild berries and the nuts grow. And he said, then the salmon stopped coming. And I remember looking up, and it was like first thing in the morning, and the sun was shining on his face, and I seen a tear coming down his cheek. And my grandfather was a tough old man. He said, and that's the first time that I seen him crying and become so emotional. And later on in life, as I studied more about our people and who we were as a Wolastoqewi, we were salmon people. That was our main source of food, was salmon and fiddleheads and the berries and the nuts that grow along the banks of the Wolastoq. And so when you said the biggest threat, well, the threat has been here and gone, are as my grandfather called them, those dams. So we can't access our main source of food no more. If there's any salmon, there's very few salmon left in our in Wolastoq that can reach only so far. As you all know, if you've traveled up and down our beautiful and bountiful river here, that there's several dams. That there's the McAlpine, there's the Beechwood, the Tobic Dam, the Tilly Dam, the Grand Falls Dam. So there's those dams that are actually that has captured the water, and that main source of life that we call it Wolastoq is it's like having a blocked artery, and then and there's no more natural flow of that river going up and down the river. And Cecilia Brooks from St. Mary's done a study several years ago about the effects of the dams, and also the places where we pick a muskrat root, because our muskrat root, gilhizawusk, which is the calamus root, is our main source of medicine. My grandfather chewed that daily, to wear off any sicknesses that may come along. And my grandfather lived to be 96. But Cecilia Brooks found out that the medicines that grow and the fiddleheads that grow along the parts of the river were actually toxic because of the waste that's been dumped in the river through factories, the McCains, and all the spraying that's been done either by farmers or by the Irving, that's been seeping down through our rivers, that eventually killed and poisoned those our much needed medicines and food source. And those dams are witness, our physical witness that how our salmon stopped coming up to spawn, and she through her studies she found out that a meter below the surface of the Wolastoqey, the top of the river, between the dams was all stagnant, and below the meter was all toxic sludge, pretty much that's underneath the top surface of the river. And he said the only way that the river can regain and reclaim her bountiful and beauty is that if we dismantle those dams, so the river can flush itself, and then eventually the salmon will come back and the medicines will come back, and our natural food source would come back that grows on the shorelines of Wolastoqey. So that's probably the biggest, the devastation of past and still the present of our nation. You know, we are called the Wolastoqewi, the people of the beautiful and bountiful river. Well, and a lot of our elders said, well, you can't call it neither of those two things. She's not beautiful or bountiful because of the pollutants that's been, dumped inside her. So, I'm thinking about our peace and friendship treaties that was signed back in 1725 and 26 with the traditional governments and the chiefs back then, and there was no surrender of land, and there was no surrender of resources, and the other big hurdle is that the government, both federal and provincial, refused to honor and respect those treaties. And if they would give us the access to our so-called crown land, we would have a great management plan, forestry management plan, and we would take care of our beautiful and bountiful river. And once again, to reclaim her back again, and then restore her, and same at the forest. We have a lot of monoculture out there, where the Irving and various different industries are planting only one type of tree, and they call that biodiversity, but that's just monoculture. And they're just going out of for their greed and for their selfish economic reasons and so on. So we need a lot of work to do to restore the forest and restore our waterways, to bring them back to once they were, they were, and so on. And we, all these species that are threatened, be it from the insect world, or from the four-legged world, or from the birds, or from the fishes, all because it's man-made. We're the ones who created that mess, and we are the ones who cause these atrocities that are happening within our lands and the waterways and the air.
Great.
Thank you.
Ron. And that's a really good segue into our next question, which is from your sort of sector or within the context of your work, what is currently being done to address some of these issues, and maybe what the gaps are that need to be addressed in the future. Donc, la prochaine question, c'est que fait-on présentement pour s'attaquer à ces problèmes, et que reste-t-il à faire dans le futur?
What do we do, and what is left to the future? We'll start with Lisa. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the initiative in which you participate, and there's still work to be done, work to do. If I take Miscou Island, the tendency of what is happening right now, there's a lot of things that are positive. Miscou nomination without the network that was on. So it's part of a network of important type for protection of the shore birds. So that nomination, as is in Fun Beach, that is an important element of protection of biodiversity. It's really to have refuge habitat. But I had the opportunity when I was in college to visit Costa Rica. It's always impressed me, that system of conservation. There were places where human can't go unless they have a scientific permit. We have to leave nature do its work. And in my school, the Shore in Health of New Brunswick, that aims to elaborate a conservation for my school. And what I want to know it from that is that it's really an approach that integrates a community. We have people from my school that are part and parcel of the developing that nature, and it's part of what I think is an approach that can bear success. It really integrated everybody in what we're doing, and we try to do it as much as we can in all our initiatives, and it works. In 2019, we took the cause of getting rid of plastic, and the fact of doing networking with the community organizations that have nothing to do with environment. They brought changes, like the Council for the Fisheries and Aquaculture Festival. Do you think we can use glasses instead of a plastic glass? Take people by the hand with solution. I propose a solution instead of proposing a problem, and that brings changes. I mean, it's better to. So this is why to be present towards a greater number of persons to talk about our cause makes a difference. And if I come back to to kindness, we're all human beings. Nobody is 100% true, and nobody is completely false. But if we have respectual kindness one against the other and a good relationship, we have a better chance of succeeding our life, to entertain good relationship with nature and to bring some positive effects. So I work also with blueberry producers. We work with fisheries to clean the shore. And some of the time, when you give an opportunity to people to have a positive impact, it's good for them also. And they're happy to participate. So if we can offer that, well, it helps. And locally speaking, that's what is happening. And in what is left to do, you name it, there's a lot. I mean, the ideas don't lack, but more people are involved, more these ideas realize easily, and the more we can develop together. But I think that, to come back to what I said in the beginning presentation, the more organization and government of municipalities were to adopt conservation mandate and positive action for the environment, we would be accomplish more, and at all level, the individuals of municipality and organization, what we need to do, because we've always been in a mode since the last 60 years of perpetual growth and everything else. So we have to see how we can slow that down at every level, because I think we're going too fast. The economy of resource will be the name of the game for the future.
C'est super intéressant de voir
It's
que les
very interesting to see that there are local projects
toutes les
that involves all the industries and every part or every groups that are not related to environment per se. and to see that they are happy to participate in that it's very nice. Yes, it's heartwarming, and when these activities happen or occur, I always feel that people with whom I will interacted are as much, maybe they don't know as much how important it is what they're doing. Thank you.
Lisa. Okay, Dawn. So, what is currently being done to address these threats, and what are some of the gaps that you see in the context of your work?
I think if habitat loss is the big threat, then obviously habitat protection is probably one of the most important things that can be done and is being done. So I think probably the most significant activity that's happened has been the establishment of the Protected Natural Areas program within government, combined with the emergence of land trust in the province of New Brunswick, the Nature Trust in New Brunswick, and the Nature Conservancy. I also think it might be a good time to give a shout out to Roberta, who was involved with the establishment of the Protected Natural Areas program in New Brunswick, pushed really hard for that, and was on the ground, and I think was a vital part of those first large P&As that were established in the early 2000s. So we owe Roberta a great debt. So both land trusts, though, I think are increasingly active as well, and combined they now protect over 12,000 hectares. The provincial P&A program now protects 270,000 hectares, and it's set for a significant increase in the next year or so. However, in spite of all this, New Brunswick protects a smaller percentage of the land base than nearly any other jurisdiction in Canada. So we need to do a lot better, and we're actually struggling to get to 10%, when in fact 17% was for a long time the international goal. And in the past few years, there have been calls that we need to be at 30% to effectively protect and maintain biodiversity. So we have a long way to go, and we have some significant challenges, but no, we're moving forward very, very slowly, but it's happening.
So do you think, just sort of building on the P&A or protected areas kind of work that's happening, do you think we're in a position to be able to achieve something closer to what we should be achieving, rather than just sort of sticking to 10%?
Well, I think it's getting increasingly difficult, because a lot of the larger pieces of property, pieces of habitat that could be protected now have been protected, and we're really reduced to trying to find, we're working with relatively smaller sites. I think one of the other things that we need to look at too is corridors between some of these sites will be increasingly important as climates change and as species are forced to migrate north. They need to be able to do that. So, can we get to 17%? Well, I think we have to get to 17%. Then we have to do better than that as well.
Great, thank you so much, Don. Roberta.
Well, Dawn, that was a great segue. We're on the same page. I definitely think that protected areas is what I wanted to talk about too, both on land and in the ocean. And we have been, that's not been our strong suit in New Brunswick. And we basically are in a position now where the provincial government is working on a 10% of the province in protected areas target, which lots of organizations worked really hard to get that kind of commitment. And so it was a tough slog even to get to 10. And from a small p political perspective, to convince the decision makers that this is what we needed to do. And we believe this is a really good program. We believe that this is good momentum to add new protected areas to the system over the next couple of years. But given how tough it is to find large intact natural areas in this process, there likely is a need for us to also be committing to rewilding some areas and restoring nature to, or allowing nature to restore, as Ron talked about the need for restoration of the Wolastoqey River. And we need to do that across the landscape, I think, as well. We need to have a lighter touch. We need to not only have protected areas, but they need to be connected to each other with well-managed lands and waters. And we definitely, our next step also needs to include stronger conservation-oriented management of our natural resources. So if we're going to be harvesting trees, and we're going to be having industrial fishing operations and other commercial efforts, then we really need to be thinking, how do we integrate biodiversity conservation at all the steps along the way? How do we make biodiversity conservation one of the top priorities of Crown land management? And how do we work with Indigenous organizations and Indigenous peoples and Indigenous nations to co-steward our land and waters so that we accomplish that together in the spirit of peace and friendship? And those are all big ticket decisions. And I know, and lots of people here know, how hard it was just to get the government to commit to a 10% of the province. And these other ideas are bigger, but the problem is bigger, and it's going to need big solutions to a big problem. That it's not just a biodiversity crisis. It's the fact that it's the biodiversity crisis interacting with the climate change crisis, and they're feeding off each other in negative ways. So that's my summary of what we need to do next.
Okay, thank you, Roberta. Ron, we'd love to hear from you.
Okay, thank you, Vanessa. I think it's long past overdue that we have to have these difficult and uncomfortable conversations, especially dealing with so-called Crown land and what's been the forest and the waterways that's been resourced to the state, and the uncomfortable conversations we have to have is that we have to all admit, whether you do or not, that this is a corporate captured province, and I'm not afraid to say it. I know I was followed and threatened by the Irvings numerous times, but they're the ones who have captured and have their foot on the neck of politicians. It's been like that since they've become this the empire who has pretty much ruled the province for many decades. And this is the discussions that we have to have, whether we like it or not. That's the truth. And seeing how they pretty much dictate to whoever the flavor of the month is of politicians and parties who are in power, that they dictate to them exactly how things will be run here within this province, and how much land that they can go and clear cut, and how much spray that they can use using glyphosate, and how many companies they can manage through this province. So those are the uncomfortable conversations we must have, whether we like it or not. That's I've watched the Irving family slowly built the built their empire, and how they monopolized this province, and even they've got their nails into some of the states and the other provinces throughout Canada. So that to me is those are the uncomfortable conversations we must have, as well, and as the peace and friendship treaties, and as unpopular as they are, to repair the relationships with the Mi'kmaq, the Wolastoqey, and the Passamoquoddy, is that the governments and all forms and all levels of governments need to respect and to honor the peace and friendship treaties. And this is how we can be at the forefront in preserving and saving lands and water and all the flora and fauna. And we know how, we're the original stewards of this land, and we know how to manage and live a very conservative lifestyle, and we have enough educated people within our own nations who can create these forestry management plans, as well as water management plans and fishing management plans. So these are the things that that need to be done, and these are the difficult decisions that we need to make. And I'm I've been around for 60 years now, and not too much has changed in the eyes of Indigenous people. And my friend Art Manuel from British Columbia, who passed away a year and a half ago, had wrote a book called Unsettled Canada, and part of his book, it clearly states that Indigenous people occupy 0.2% of all Canada, and the settler population has populated 99.8% of all of Canada. And people wonder why our people live in such poverty and high cases of suicide and addictions and abuses and so on. So when you cage a group of people into small postage stamps of land, they're like caged birds when they're so used to flying freely, and now they live within that little postage stamp piece of land, and they can't even sustain themselves and through food or water sovereignty, and we have to rely on these little piddly crumbs that fall off the government's tables, and just in the last day or so, Premier Higgis dismissed the taxation agreement between the communities and the government, and those taxation dollars were used for special programs for our the elderly and the youth, to build more homes, to give jobs to our people. And again, here we have governments doing this, and then and they put $20 million towards these small nuclear reactors, and they call it green power, which is such a false and bogus statement. I've never known nuclear to be clean. So here we are again, continuously behind the 8 ball, and trying to make some steps forward, and it's like we take 1 step forward and 6 back. Each time, Indigenous people trying to better themselves, or even have a stand in protecting the land. I was arrested up to Wolastoqey in helping our me and my sisters and brothers standing against the fracking back in 2013, you know, and I'm listed as a terrorist. You know, I was doing a ceremony while I was arrested, and they labeled me as a red flag terrorist in Canada now to peacefully demonstrate the protecting land. So these are the difficulties that we as Indigenous people have lived for decades and continue to. And, you know, and that's all forms of genocide. And that's eco-genocide, that's human genocide towards Indigenous people, and that there's a continuation from all forms of government. So that's my short rant. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ron. I'm sure all of us share your frustration with this as well. So I'd like to thank our panelists for answering those two main questions. That was some really good information. So I think the next thing we're going to do is Clara's going to field a few questions from our audience. So you still have time to put in the chat if you do have a question for somebody specific, or maybe there's just a general question that you'd like to have answered, and then we'll sort of see where we are with time. So go ahead, Clara.
Okay, we have a question from Jay Gilbert, and I assume this is just for the panel as a whole, so feel free to just chime in if you have an answer to this. But he or they ask, seeing as New Brunswick is 50% private property, how do you see this contributing to provincial biodiversity? Does anyone feel that they have an answer for that?
Well, I'm not sure that I have an answer, but what comes to mind is that if we have like prepared solutions for these people that want to be biodiversity stewards, that we have a plans on how they can do this with their land, you know, because right now I know people who have woodlots are asking me questions about what can I do to better manage for biodiversity my land, but these are not readily available. So if we could have, si on avait déjà ces réponses-là, puis je pense qu'il faut se préparer à ça. Je pense que si l'avenir se passe un petit peu comme ce que je veux,
is somewhat what I am looking for. More and more people will want to participate in the cause and take things in their own hands. It may be a good thing, but I don't know the 50%. If it's all related to people, like if we eliminate the irving, well, then it make things different. Anyway.
Merci, Lisa.
I wanted to follow up on that. Just exactly what Lisa says. I think there's a gap right now in terms of offering information and giving opportunities to private landowners to do good things with their land. So I know that's something that a lot of the conservation groups, Roberta included, are at the table trying to figure out how to make sure that everybody knows the opportunities that exists around stewardship, whether it's Crown land or private land. So that's certainly something that's on our radar, and we're looking for more opportunities on how to share that information, especially within the context of this Nature Legacy program that we have going on right now.
I just add one thing. I think it's worth noting that Nova Scotia, which doesn't have anywhere near as much Crown land as New Brunswick, has managed to protect a lot more land. They're way ahead of the province. So I think there is a really important role for private property and private landowners to be involved in protecting biodiversity. And it maybe is, you know, a minor thing like, you know, making sure that a wetland is maintained on your property. And there are certainly woodlot owners in New Brunswick who are managing their woodlots in a sustainable way so that they are biodiverse. And I think we need to do as much as we can to encourage that kind of activity.
And I think it's really important that we need to have programs that help to support providing that information to the population at the different levels that they exist. So There are people that need to conserve biodiversity in their backyard. Municipalities need to conserve biodiversity, the green spaces and the blue spaces within their municipalities, that they have a role in making sure that they are conserved, even as we're still living in these spaces. And then in rural areas, a different kind of information, a different kind of program is going to be needed. So it depends upon where these private lands are located, and we need layers, multiple layers of what used to be called, in New Brunswick, there used to be a forest extension program, and it provided information to people who were managing private woodlots on ways they could be managing their private woodlots. And we don't have that anymore, but we could start having a biodiversity extension offices. There are definitely in the United States programs where they provide information to communities, municipalities, landowners of all shapes and sizes. And so I do think that there is a role on private land as well. It's just that private land, by the way that it exists, is naturally fragmented by owners. And so you really need a lot more effort to try and get landowners to work together to conserve a wetland that they all might share on their property, one little small bit of it, or an old forest habitat, or some important piece of bog or something like that, peat bog. So I think that the reason that our organization focuses so much on crown, so-called crown land, is that there should be an opportunity for creating larger areas where nature is being conserved as the highest priority. And it should be something that should be easier to do. But on private land, that's the complicating factor. And that means that governments collectively need to invest in getting over that barrier.
Thank you, Roberta. Ron, do you have anything to add about what the role of private land is in increasing biodiversity in New Brunswick?
Well, I think that what would be a step forward is there should be, I think it was previously mentioned, some sort of an educational program where it's where private landowners can to access that and to learn more about how to preserve and protect that land in which they live. I think that would be a step forward. I'm not sure if New Brunswick has such a program, but I'm just throwing that out there. So
yes, that's similar to what Lisa first mentioned. I just want to read out a comment that's in the chat that's directed towards Ron, just because Ron, I don't think you can see the chat. But Bethany Young says that the treatment of Indigenous people in Canada is certainly a massive barrier to protecting biodiversity. Very relevant points, Ron. Great response. As panelist, we have a lot of work to do. So I just wanted to share that from Bethany. I have a question from Marianne that's directed towards Dawn. They have two questions, so I'm just going to combine them. Dawn, are we seeing reductions in insects? And they also continue on and they say, I found that rhubarb and crocuses came up to 2 to 4 weeks early this April. Can the early bloom affect the bee population?
Well, the answer to that is, the short answer is yes, there are undoubtedly insect declines in New Brunswick. The more complicated answer is that we don't actually have any data to support that in this part of the world. We know that pollinators are declining across North America. In parts of Europe, there's good data on insect declines. So it would be actually very surprising if there weren't declines in insects in this part of the world as well. So we need to get better information, better data, but we can probably assume that there are insect declines going on. Certainly things are happening earlier and earlier all the time, and there is some historical data to suggest that some of the early blooming trees are blooming some weeks earlier, that Frogs are calling weeks earlier. There's some good data supporting that. So that is one of the issues, is that some of these interdependencies are becoming somewhat out of sync, and that insects start to fly at not quite the right time for birds that are looking for food for nestlings, that flowers start to bloom at not quite when the pollinators are available. So those are certainly things that we need to be really concerned about.
And if people are interested, there's a program called Nature Watch, which exactly what Don just said. It's people taking note when things bloom and when frogs, peepers, you start to hear them, and all that goes into database for scientists across the country to be able to use.
I heard the peepers calling last weekend at Hyla Park. They're
Yeah,
very loud.
Wood frogs are calling now too.
Yeah, saw those too. They're competing for each other.
Yeah.
Another comment from Bethany about there's a programs with both Nature Trust and with Talks Unlimited related to biodiversity protection for landowners. So those are two really great resources for anyone that's interested. We have a question from Tim. Tim, I'm not sure who this is directed towards or if it's just a general question, but Tim asks, with the price of timber currently so high, could we increase royalties on the cutting of crown lands and use this to invest in conservation efforts?
We could try. Good luck. I doubt, I mean, it's a great suggestion. The prices of royalties for crown land harvesting are set in a really complicated way, and it's really difficult for those of us who are outside the system to understand exactly how that pricing happens. And it happens so far in advance. So, and it's set quite a ways in advance. So it's not something that at least I don't think, unless somebody else on the call may know more about this than I do, and quite likely you do, because this is definitely not my area of expertise. But I would say that throughout my career, there has always been this call about, can't we just raise the royalty rates on crown timber? And it never seems to be the case that that's the answer that happens. So it seems to be a tough decision to make, but there might be other people on the call who have something they could throw in the chat or something if they know a little bit about that.
While we wait for those comments, there is another comment or question from Don from Jay Gilbert. They say, hope to hear about the status of bats. I saw 3 little brown bats in my yard this week. Can you comment?
Yeah, okay. Well, there are 7 species of bats in New Brunswick, and 3 of them are affected, of course, by white nose, and their numbers are, well, they're vanishingly small now. So you saw a brown bat in your yard. If you were very lucky, it could have been a little brown bat. This is one of the species that's endangered now, but it was more likely that it was actually a big brown bat. This is of the 7 species, this is the one in New Brunswick that has actually increased in numbers over the last several decades. Not because the others have declined, but because of probably climate warming, and it's shifted its range northward. And it's now actually the most abundant species of bat in the southern third of the province. So it's also a species that tends to leave hibernation a little earlier than some of the others, and is more cold tolerant than little browns or northern long-eared bats, which are the other 2 small brown bats in the province. So my guess is that you probably saw a big brown bat, and that's great.
We have time for about one more question, if maybe just 1 or 2 people answer it. And this question is from Mario, and they ask, as an eco-conscious private woodlot owner, I have been dismayed by the recent drought that have significantly impacted my swampy cedar woodlands. My tamarack and black spruce are dying, the moss is yellow and dry throughout the summer. This is threatening the black ash growing back there. What can one do against such overwhelming forces? Not sure if there's any forest experts.
I'm not sure what one can do against such overwhelming forces. They, you know, a lot of these large scale changes that are occurring are overwhelming, and it's very difficult to know what to do in a case like that.
I think if anything, that shows the interconnectedness of all of it, because you mentioned many different issues with different species, Mario. Vanessa, if you want to take it away for the last question.
Absolutely, yeah. And Bethany's suggesting getting a beaver, which, sure.
Which is an excellent Canadian answer.
That is that's like literally perfect. Love it. Okay. Okay, folks. So we kind of wanted to end on a positive note. So the last question is about what everyone can do and hopefully inspire and spark some action amongst all of you that are attending. So in 1 or 2 sentences, try to keep it short. What is a tangible action that everyday New Brunswickers can do to make a difference in protecting biodiversity or our natural areas? Donc, dans 1 ou 2 phrases, quelles sont les mesures concrètes que les Néo-Brunswickois peuvent prendre pour faire une différence dans la protection de la biodiversité et de nos zones naturelles? So maybe we'll start with Ron. A couple sentences on what everyday people can do.
Oh, that's a big question for for just 2 sentences. And you know, I'm a political minded person, and I think it's time for a huge shift within this province. The only way we can help our biodiversity is to hopefully elect like-minded people within your political establishments, either provincially or federally, into taking this climate change more seriously and about protecting and preserving all the flora and fauna. And you know, it was it's within our prophecies that was told to us for many decades, is that we need to start to shift our lifestyles and not to take any more than we need. I think once we start to respect and live with the land and not live by either clear cutting or taking. I think I have all my marbles are on our young people. They're the ones who are finally waking up and who are taking the climate change seriously. And I put all my marbles in their bag, hopefully that they will save and protect life for our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ron. Maybe I should have ended with that. That was like a nice, passing the torch on. So everybody, let's go with John.
Well, I think we could all start by supporting our charitable land trusts. But I think we also need to make it clear to politicians that the Protected Natural Areas program is vital to all of us. That program, in spite of its importance, tends to run on a shoestring budget with a very small staff. So, I think those are 2 important things that people can do. But I think we also need to recognize that it's often the incremental loss of relatively small areas of green space, a wetland here, a hardwood ridge there, that eventually means the large-scale degradation of habitat and biodiversity loss. And so we need to be concerned about that. And I think that kind of keeping track of what's happening in your own community in terms of habitat loss is something that we can all do.
That's great. Thank you, Don. Lisa? Oh, vous êtes...
Pour ajouter,
To add something different, I would invite everybody to increase your circle of awareness. There's nothing like taking people from around us by the hand to share our values and your action. And if everyone could share with our family and our friends the values and what is important for us, we could maybe increase the circle and be positive. Very well said, Lisa.
You're muted, by the way.
Do you want me to go next?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, if you said my name, I was listening to the French translation. So.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Yep.
You're up next. I was like, I don't know why she's thinking
because I didn't hear you call my name.
Okay.
Okay. So the main thing I think we need everybody can do and make it tangible, make it something you will do, is commit to yourself that you're going to stand up and speak out within your sphere of influence. So it doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be you talk about things you don't know about. It has to be stand up for what you care about. And if that means you're talking to your friends and your neighbors and you're talking to family members, what we need is societal change. It's a movement. So the decision makers of tomorrow need to be engaged in this discussion too. And some of those decision makers of tomorrow are your neighbors who are going to be running in municipal elections this month. So it's all about getting engaged in, be a citizen and be engaged, but within your sphere of influence. If you're busy and there are only so many things you can do, just to at least do something and feel like you're participating in making people a little bit more aware about those values and why we need to all care about them at every level of society.
Very true, Roberta. Thank you. Clara?
I'm not a panelist, but I actually have something to add to that, just because a lot of people brought up voting, and there are municipal elections coming up, and municipal elections can have a much larger effect on your life than provincial or federal, but they often don't get as much media attention or just even attention in general. So I don't doubt that most people in the audience are active voters and whatnot, but just, that can have a really big influence as municipal voting. So get out and vote in this May. On that note, thank you very much to everyone. Thank you to our panelists for participating tonight. There was some really fantastic discussions, and I can't believe it's already 8 o'clock. I wish we had the entire evening because I feel like we could all talk forever. I'm really grateful that we were able to end the wildlife webinar series with a discussion like this. This was my first big project at the NBEN, so I'm really happy with how it turned out. I'm really glad that we were able to end it with such a broad and overarching discussion, and most importantly, one that is action-oriented. So thank you again to our panelists. I really appreciate your time. This was fantastic. And thank you to our audience for coming and participating tonight, as well as in all of the past webinars. I hope that you enjoyed yourself and that you've enjoyed the series as a whole. And then one last big thank you to our funder, the New Brunswick Wildlife Trust Fund, and to the Department of the Natural Resources. So thank you, everyone, and good night.